Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cultivating Culture Shifts. I'm Lee Perry, your host, climate activist here in Orlando, Florida, and I have two very special guests who will be joining us to talk about an awesome organization called Sunrise Movement Orlando, and I will let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Giancarlo Rodriguez. I'm one of the co-hub coordinators of Sunrise Movement Orlando, and I've lived in Orlando basically my whole life.
Hi, my name is Hannah and Giancarlo. I am the other co-hub coordinator for Sunrise Orlando. And I was also raised in Orlando, and I'm just part of the many youth climate activists here working to see a change for a better Orlando that we know is possible.
Awesome. So tell me, what gravitated you both towards being activists generally? Like, why are you not just focusing on your studies and on building your career? Why are you also taking on becoming an activist locally?
Yeah, so I think for me, like growing up, I feel like there was a lot of things that I just didn't see getting done. And it just got more and more frustrating. I mean, our generation, we grew up seeing like a lot of school shootings. We grew up seeing more of the impact of the climate crisis and kind of like little action being taken. A lot of things are like not going well. And I think for me, something that was kind of very shocking is that when you look at like the polls of like most Americans, like a majority agrees that we need to like work on climate. A majority agrees that we need gun safety laws. A majority believes that we need like universal healthcare, but it's like it's not getting done. And so I think, at least for me, I feel like that was something that was kind of like very shocking, kind of frustrated, and also kind of activated me, because I was like, we deserve so much better, and we know that we deserve better here in the States. So we need people to be fighting to make that happen. And seeing a lot of people in the fight, a lot of activists, like as I was growing up, I was definitely inspired because I saw a lot of results too. So I wanted to be a part of making the world, and specifically Orlando, a better place.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
What about you?
And so for me, I'm actually, I'm an older sister. I have a younger brother. And always growing up, I've had a very protective instinct over him. And then as I grew older, of my parents, and then as I grew older, of my friends and my community. And it's kind of, it's gotten, my concerns have become global at this point. And so I think that also applies to a lot of people where I hate seeing on my phone, not even just on my phone, but right now, on my phone about everything that's happening all across the world, all of the humanitarian disasters, climate disasters. And so kind of seeing that every day, but also seeing the corruption happening, not only within the government, but even within schools, and seeing the way that it impacted my brother and my friends growing up. That's kind of what motivated me. And then as I was kind of trying to navigate, what do I do about this? Meeting my friend like Giancarlo and other youth advocates, seeing that we all have this common goal of wanting to see a better world was very encouraging for me. And so I think that's what got me here right now.
Feels good to hear that empathy is growing, because sometimes it's so easy to just become apathetic, especially with all the distractions that we have, and Netflix and streaming services, and then of course social media. Like, I feel like a lot of people sometimes kind of default to doing nothing. But it sounds like you guys being exposed to so much so young are actually doing the opposite. You're like, you feel this innate sense of empathy growing and you want to do something about it. That's what you're saying. So tell me more about Sunrise Movement and why you're both involved.
Yeah, so Sunrise Movement is a national organization all throughout the United States. It's fighting for the Green New Deal, which is essentially creating more green jobs and getting away from the fossil fuel industry. So a just transition, and really tackling climate change from an intersectional point of view, making sure to look at all the different aspects of it, whether it be housing, transportation, class inequality, race inequality, making sure that when we're fighting against climate change, that we're considering all of these things. And Sunrise, they've had a pretty big impact in U.S. national politics already. They've shaped like the Inflation Reduction Act, which Joe Biden made. They played a big role in like influencing that and creating better outcomes with that. It definitely isn't what we need. Like, in the sense where it's like we obviously need more, and we hope to see more. However, they definitely like made things go in a better direction, kind of like tilt the needle a little bit, tilt the scales, if you will. They've been doing a lot of that work. They've pushed Joe Biden to make the American Climate Corps actually a national program now, which is going to give thousands of young people green jobs. So like jobs like going out in the fields, in the forests, and kind of like doing like climate mitigation work and like climate like protection work to make sure that our ecosystems are intact, which impacts a lot of our lives, you know? So that's kind of a bit about Sunrise National, like Sunrise on a national level. But we are part of Sunrise Movement Orlando, which is takes a more, it's basically Sunrise with an Orlando twist, you know? So so we're kind of a newer organization, but we're kind of like we're like a hub of the national Sunrise Movement.
Yeah, and with Florida having so many, we have a lot of different barriers that not the rest of the United States has to experience. And so for us, you know, we feel that local advocacy, that's the crucial word, is the first step to kind of getting anywhere. And I think a lot of us, any kind of youth climate or just any kind of advocate here in Florida, they experience a lot of resistance, and we're not taken seriously. And so kind of taking on these small, tangible steps is what we're here doing in Orlando.
Great. Yeah. And so just to elaborate, you know, some of the barriers that I think you're referencing here, you know, money is obviously in politics nationwide, but specifically in Florida, we're seeing this uneven tipping point where our political infrastructure is like kind of completely overrun by corporate interest money. And that tips the scale in the direction where private interests supersede the needs of the people in the forefront of the minds of our legislators, both Democrat and Republican in many places throughout the state. So the barriers in Florida are particularly unique because it's so much more saturated here. The corruption is so much more saturated here. And we're seeing that in other places pop up in the South and other places in the Midwest. But at the same time, nationwide, there's this whole other movement of progressive legislators making these bounds that are bringing even more moderate to conservative states into this like forward thinking path. So I feel like it's a swing. You know what I mean? I feel like activism work is more of a swing than it is like a arrow on a, you know, like a line on a graph. Like we're not just going to get from point A to point B. It's consistent organizing and consistent advocacy work that is slow, but it works. Like we have different parts in history where we've seen it work, and it's happening in other parts of the country. So those unique barriers here in Florida, I definitely understand, but it's worth the time doing this right now.
Yeah, I would say it's not a race, it's a marathon. You know what I mean? That's kind of like how we approach it as well. And yeah, I think in Florida too, Florida is definitely special in the sense that we have, like, for example, Big Sugar, which plays a big role in our politics. We have Florida Power and Light, which is a kind of like a energy monopoly in Florida that also has a big influence on our politics. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because we have these like very like unsustainable big corporations kind of like running Florida, but at the same time there's actually a study or a poll that came out recently by Florida Atlantic University that said that 90% of Floridians believe climate change is happening right now, and that was higher than America as a whole. And I think that is because Floridians, like, it's very hard to be in Florida, even if you have different political beliefs, to deny that climate change is happening because you live it. You know what I mean?
Right.
You experience it with the hurricanes, the worst flooding. Like it is kind of like undeniable here in Florida. And right. I think it also adds to that urgency too.
Mm-hmm. They might not call it climate change though, but people know something's wrong, regardless of what the partisan side of the scale that they lie on. Like, you can see it with your own eyes. You can feel it with your own skin when you go outside. I mean, Florida's changing, and it's affecting our economy. It's affecting small businesses. It's affecting hunters. It's affecting people who live on the coast. people who live near wetlands or previously lived near wetlands before they were developed. Like people, I feel like you said, Florida's on the front lines of the climate crisis. It's just the private interests that have been in the ears of our legislators have been actively trying to do whatever they can to obfuscate around the facts, because they're trying to basically gut our state for as much profit as possible, sell as much land as possible, strip as many resources as possible. And it takes young leaders that, quite frankly, there's a mistrust in our political arena across both sides. Young leaders like you all, you have nothing to lose or gain. The climate crisis is here whether you're organizing or not, right? The fact that you guys are doing this work, you're not trying to make millions of dollars by lining your pocket with corporate interests like some other legislators are. You're doing this because you care and because you need to see a change, because your future is at risk, right? And that's why you're so much easier to be the convincing liaisons to the voters than a politician, because your parents, your family members, your friends' families, like they're going to be so moved by you because they see your heart and they see your passion, and that you really aren't doing this out of anything but your desire to have a future. So I think that's really powerful.
Thank you. I mean, also, I think something that kind of came off on the top of my head was how difficult it is, in Florida, because we have that statistic that we know that it's here. The problem is people aren't holding accountability. And that is probably a lot to do with, like you're saying, like politicians that are leading with special corporate interests. But, then these blames are being placed on us, like the working class people. We are being told, watch your carbon footprint. Obviously recycling is crucial, but we're being told you guys should recycle. Greenwashing is a thing everywhere, all over the nation. And so when that happens, it's particularly difficult, at least for us, to try and encourage other people to kind of get involved in this space. Yeah.
And I think that to the point too, like I think with like all these like corporate interests, like FPL, like you wouldn't think that like they should be involved in politics, but they do. They have I guess they have skin in the game. They're like playing the game, and it's working in their favor right now. So I think like here in Sunrise, we're essentially trying to like play the game too and beat them at it. You know what I mean? We're trying to like push back because like they're really messing up our politics, and that's impacting our lives and really hurting us.
Right. So maybe tell me a little bit. First, we'll start nationwide and then we'll talk local. Like, why is Sunrise Movement even really needed? Like, if people already know, if they already see what's going on at their doorstep, why is a place like or an organization like Sunrise Movement even important?
I feel that, like you were saying, with the lack of trust that we have, even though we're here, I feel like we were motivated and we were encouraged to kind of join the fight because of the community. And so Sunrise Movement is one of, the many communities available to people to kind of reshift their energy and turn kind of anger and frustration into something that's more productive and transferring that into action.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I love the most about Sunrise Movement is kind of like, I guess like we all have like gotten like a lot closer, like the people inside of it. And I feel like that community is crucial to make any change, like helping each other, working together. I think that with a lot of people, they might like see stuff and have, let's say, they might have like certain ideas of how the world should change and how the world could be a better place. But a lot of people, like, they don't know how to do it. You know what I mean? It can be a lonely fight, and you might not even know, like, oh, will people even support me, or like would people even want to like do this with me? Because one person definitely does have a lot of power, I would say, but I think that it can be hard to do alone, especially if you don't have any guidance, if you don't have anyone to like kind of like be in that struggle with. So I think to Hannah's point, like what Sunrise Movement is essentially like kind of like creating that community that can have like groups of like-minded people working together and fighting really hard, and being able to do a lot more than they could have than just one person. Because like think about it, if one person has power, imagine how much power like multiple people have. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think Sunrise Movement plays a big role in that, and also just like educating people about stuff that normally wouldn't be talked about. Because I think a lot of people have an idea of the climate crisis, but I think that sometimes the knowledge can be a bit limiting to a sense. You know what I mean? Like people might hear like, oh, like my carbon footprint, like that's something I have to like work on and do. And I think that is important, to like live a more sustainable lifestyle. But I think that people probably, like a lesser known fact is probably that like carbon footprint was like made by like gas companies, you know what I mean? And so I think that like what Sunrise is kind of doing is like bringing up these points that aren't like talked about a lot, so that people can have like the full picture.
Mm-hmm.
And then through then like either take action or like and kind of like have a better idea of what they can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think corporations obviously have the money to spread misinformation. We know that that's a very common thing in the climate fight, was that the fossil fuel industries knew generations before everybody else found out that this was a global industry that would create global harm on a scale that would be irreparable. But I think to your point about how it's not really taught in school. You know, I got my degree in environmental studies, and I really didn't learn about the climate crisis until much later in life through organizing work and trying to bring in different speakers from all over the world to come into my community and talk about their levels of expertise, because it's not just it is a little bit more now than when I was in college, but it's not just like an easily accessible subject that you just learn in school, nor is it just the baseline of our curriculum. And social media can be a blessing and a curse in this way, because a lot of kids and young adults are being exposed to information that our parents didn't know when they were young and when they were growing up. Obviously in the 60s, there was this Earth Day movement, like we got to do our due diligence to take care of the earth. But the actual data to talk about how the global scale of the fossil fuel industry was creating harm has been kind of a secret from modern society for years and years and years. And with social media, we also are given this tool to show the true harm, that the complexity and the momentous harm that is being done. And I think sometimes because we got all that information in just a few years, social media is fairly new. I think it generates a lot of apathy in young people sometimes, in our older generations. It's just human nature. You have fright, flight, or fight, right? So it's like you can either be a deer in the headlights and just be frozen. You could succumb to your fear and just, run. Just decide I'm leaving Florida, or I'm leaving the United States, or think you can leave this problem. Mm-hmm. Or you fight, which is you do everything you can to find a solution. And I think that starts with organizing, right? So maybe if you guys wanted to elaborate on how you feel doing this work and what sets you apart from the people that are just like binge watching Netflix and not really taking responsibility.
I feel like first and foremost, like what you were saying about like social media, it's very true. I feel like human beings were not made biologically to, take in so much information, but also this like globalization, kind of seeing what's happening live. And so I guess for us, in a way, I feel like organizing is a very privileged space because we have the time, we have the energy, we have, our body is healthy enough to be able to contribute to this. And so I know for me, I'm kind of here in this space, not only to like represent myself, but represent the people that can't be here.
Right.
For me, interestingly enough, like I kind of got involved in this space because I'm pursuing social work. And so this gives me like a very different perspective on climate justice, which isn't often spoken about. And it's really unfortunate because now climate, or I guess for some people, it's not the word climate, like you were saying, but the climate crisis is evident for people because the wealthy and the rich are the ones that are feeling it finally. But indigenous communities hundreds of years ago have been able to see this happen. Like they knew that this was going to happen and they've been warning us, and so I think what makes us different maybe is the fact that we have this time and the energy and like we're aware of that. And so because we have that, we want to be useful with that. This privilege that we have, because what's the point if we don't do anything to help the world, even though that sounds really cliche, but
right.
It's
no,
true.
absolutely.
Yeah, I would say that with Sunrise, I think, on the online spaces, like it's a lot of information. And sometimes it's good to get the information of like what's happening and what's going on. But sometimes I feel like the information that's harder to find out is like, what can you do? You know what I mean? Like, what's the action you can take after finding out this information? And I think that there's a lot of good organizations that do that good work where they tell you the information and they're also like, so here's what you can do about it. So I think that's kind of what makes Sunrise like stand out as well, is that we talk about what's going on and we like make sure to educate people about like, here's the issues, here's what we're facing, but we also give people the space and the community to do something about it. So, and I think that does make a big difference in like activating more people, mobilizing more people, and essentially like letting people see that they have power. You know what I mean? That there's power, that they don't have to just like look at the screen and watch what's happening and be like, wow, like I can't do anything. Like, I don't know where to even start. Because I think that honestly, I would say a lot of people want to do something, or a good amount of people do, but they just don't know like how to start. I think for me personally, that would like, I would see a lot of stuff online, but I wouldn't know what I could do for like a very long time. And it wasn't until like more recently that I like found organizations that resonated with me and like kind of like learned more so like how does like being active look like, and how does taking action look like. And I think that hopefully, Sunrise, we can encourage more people to take action, because there's definitely a lot of people out there who want to, they just don't know how.
Right. I think too, because growing up and making my transition into activism work, I felt very similarly to both of you. So I think that's really good takes, because I feel like I'm just talking to two different parts of my brain, right? Sitting here in front of me, which is really cool. But I think another element is as I started to deconstruct the way life is for us here, I started to realize that things don't have to be this way. We don't have to be so dependent on cars. We don't have to be so dependent on a poison-driven, profit-driven food industry for agriculture that is polluting and stripping resources in order to put food on our plate. Like, as I started to deconstruct a lot of these ways of life that are just how things are, I started realizing that like I actually do have the power to show people that things could be different and open up their minds. And when you do that, I don't know if there's a word, help me research it. I'm sure people will be able to find this word. But when that light bulb goes off, that epiphany moment, and you're kind of responsible for that, it helps feed back some endorphins in your brain, and it makes you feel powerful. Mm-hmm. It is such a beautiful feeling that my genuine curiosity and my enticing feeling to want to do that more, because I started to see people recycling that, or having their own composter, or slowly I started to see these little light bulbs turn into action in their small ways for the people that I had the honor of touching their lives for a small period of time. And it lit something in me to want to see how far this could go, right? Now, this was after a time in my life when in college, in environmental studies, I didn't really touch a plant until like my last class in senior year.
Mm.
And I didn't learn about the climate crisis at the scale that, you can readily see online. Like, I didn't have a cell phone till I was 20 something years old. And it all hit me at once during a time when it really didn't catch up to the rest of society yet. So that isolation in what I know and what I'm passionate about, getting the information and then becoming like a climate activist was very isolating. So it was detrimental to my mental health. I went into like a mental health spiral. I was contemplating self-harm. I was doing a lot of things that I feel, is still very common throughout the climate activism space, because it is a lot that our parents and our grandparents didn't really have. They had issues, but they didn't really have that scale of issues right here in front of their faces, right? That feedback of power in waking up people and showing them realities and how they can organize and how they can take control of their own situations and make something of it, it saved my life. And I think that it's so positive and so beautiful that work like what you all are doing with the Sunrise Movement can make such a huge difference. I think it could turn into more people with genuine hearts running for office, which could directly combat the corporate greed that is infiltrating. If we can expose people to why the movement's important, we can then show them how to see the difference between good and bad legislators as well. Like, it's just awesome work. Yeah. I don't know if you guys wanted to share more on your thoughts.
I think, thank you for sharing your story, Lee. It's definitely it can be very, very isolating. It can be very difficult. I feel like, especially like this is information that I feel like is very hard to, like regarding the climate crisis or like all the issues that we're facing, is very hard to kind of like sit with that and kind of have to like live with that. But it's definitely important to, know that, to take action. I think that I lost my thought. Do you want to go, Hannah?
Yeah. No. I feel like we live in a generation where a lot of us feel purposeless. I think our Gen Z particularly, we have the worst rates of depression and anxiety out of any generation that has ever existed. And so, transforming that hopelessness into hopefulness through this community of, other climate activists, has been something that's really transformed me too. I think, I kind of spiraled into my own personal hell when I was in high school, as a result of some corruption within like our education system. And kind of looking back at it, it's really driven me into a space where I've felt the need to take action. Like, that's like the biggest thing. And that has given me the greatest sense of purpose. And a lot of adults may look at this conversation and be like, oh, that's so like, unrealistic, but I think, having this sense of purpose is the greatest thing I could have asked for. And it's so crucial for everyone to have that. And so that's why, Sunrise Movement, at least, Orlando, our biggest thing is making sure that we give the platform to people who feel that sense of purposeless, who don't feel like they're here for a reason. and kind of giving them a reason to like wake up in the morning, like, hey, this is what I have to do. You know, sometimes even with school, it can get into a really weird cycle if you don't know why you're there.
Right.
And so having this goal is, you know, it's been a great journey to be able to go through. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I think that it's very true. Like, you know, like our generation, Gen Z, like we're one of the, like kind of what Hannah was saying, we are like the loneliest generation. We're the generation that has the most anxiety and the most depression. And I think that a lot of our generation has experienced that. So I feel like, and a lot of the time it is because of the current system that we're living in, right? It's kind of like this system that we're kind of like taught, like you said, Lee, like this is just how it is. This is kind of like the necessary evil. But I feel like for me, like kind of like learning about history, especially American history, and kind of like seeing like these different movements, like the civil rights movement, the queer movement, all these different movements, like fighting for justice. Like when they were fighting, like people probably they were told like it's impossible. It probably like it's unrealistic. You're never gonna do it. Like what you guys are fighting for is like extreme or radical. But at the end of the day, like we're kind of living in their wildest dreams right now. You know what I mean? We're living in a world where obviously not everything is like good, but we've made so much progress. And I think that is kind of like how the world works in a way where there's a good amount of people who are like, I don't think that's possible. I don't think you can do it. But the people who like dream big, the people who like really do believe that a better world is possible, like those are kind of the ones who change the world and like make the world a better place. So I think that getting people to see that it's not impossible. It's just super important, because that's how you make change. You know what I mean? The first step is like knowing that it can happen. And it's so hard in a world that tells you it can't, it's impossible. Like that's like, we have to do this, we can't do that. A lot of the time, like I would say that is like BS.
Yeah. And I'm just curious because sometimes I see young people organize. I get so excited because I'm like, yeah, they're the future. But sometimes I get really sad because I think of all, you know, I think of what your childhood and what your youth could be when the responsible people in the room, the adults in the room, actually adulted, right? I think that was my biggest like moment of feeling like the floor just like fell out from under me, was when I started to grow up realizing that the people I look to have the answers are just trying to make as much profit as possible and run, or are kind of dumb.
Yeah.
Like they kind of like don't listen to facts. Like it's basically like high school just never ends. Like you have the bullies, you have the people that just want it for popularity. They just want it because they want influence. It's like they really don't want to genuinely be there to get an education or to make something of themselves. They're just doing it for their own self-interest. That is very short-term thinking. And when you realize that young, and it's getting younger and younger and younger, because like kids have cell phones, they're born with cell phones now. It feels like we're robbing young people of their ability to be innocent and young. And at the same time, when the state legislature is trying to make moves to like remove social media from young people, it feels like they're trying to strip them from their access of knowing to further control them. So we were in this situation where, you know, I want to empower young people to feel that they have a place at the table, that they have a voice at the table. But I also am sad to see people like Congressman Frost, who's doing such great things, have to commit his 20s and beyond to public service and make extreme sacrifices to just have somebody have an adequate voice in our Congress who's saying the things on gun violence and on climate that we all want to hear. It's sad to know that 50, 60, 70, and 80-year-olds that are currently representing us don't read a book or see the same information that we see, or they do and they're just ignoring it on purpose.
Yeah, That is like the worst case scenario. Hopefully they're not, but I don't know.
I, for one, oh, did you want
Yeah, I guess for me, I think about that a lot actually regarding like, cause I feel like I'm like very young, and I feel like the political world, the advocacy world is like, it's a very tough space to be in. Like, not gonna lie, like it takes a lot of grit. It takes a lot of like, you have to be very strong and you have to dedicate a lot of time, right? So for me, actually, when I was, so I'm this is my last year in college. I go to the University of Florida. When I first started college, the first thing I knew is like, I love politics. Like politics is my passion, but I need to do something else because like it's just gonna be too much. But it was funny because as like I continued in my college career, I just kept gravitating towards politics, and I was like, this is what I love. This is my passion. Like I can't escape it whether I want it or not. And I think kind of like thinking about it, like I feel like I've kind of stopped thinking of it of robbing my youth per se, or like kind of like, because I think that for me, what makes me happy is like, at least like, if there's certain things I wish I could have experienced or I had the more time for in my youth, at least like if I don't get to experience, at least I can kind of create that. I can create a world where the people, like the next people in the next generation, they don't have to like deal with all these problems. Essentially, I feel like that's something that really like grounds me. Like people, like my friends, my family, like my, if like the next generation, their children, they at least like they can experience a better world, and we can all experience a better world together. You know what I mean? Even if I'm like, 80 years old, like if the world has gotten better, which I think it will, like I think I'll be happy.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say what you said, Lee, because that's my parents' biggest concern. Every day after I come back from a sunrise event or just planning something and they see some kind of stress in my face, I was like, Hannah, like, I'm really worried for you, like that on top of the fact that, I, for one, am diagnosed with anxiety, and I think being like learning, I think this is us as humans evolving in a way. I think, us carrying our empathy is like a form of us evolving in a way that, at unprecedented rates, in very different ways. And I also feel like I'm very empowered to know the information that I know and to kind of have the stances that I do have, because when I have conversations with adults in my life, they are taken back. They're like, oh, like I didn't, they kind of view, I think, a lot of more progressive youth advocates as being babies and that they whine and that they're super soft, when in reality, like I think being able to have a platform like Sunrise, it's empowered us to have all of this information and to have really tough conversations with the adults in our lives that have been in denial and have been privileged for their entire lives. And in a way, like they might, it's something that they probably have never heard about before, or they're being misled into thinking that it's fake news. But yeah, in a way, I think, like I've been saying, it's been an empowering experience to have all the information. And I guess I never thought about it as, robbing my youth, because I feel like we also have to make an effort to create time for ourselves and have space for mental health. And so I think our biggest thing is like juggling the two, is, make sure like we make time for ourselves, seek therapy if you need to, if you have the access to, and then prioritizing self-care throughout this whole thing is a battle, but it's been crucial. And yeah, it's been, yeah.
Yeah, burnout is too real.
Right.
Burnout is really real. So I think in Sunrise, we definitely try to keep that in mind, because we don't want to burn our people out. We want people to have, have a life outside of Sunrise as well. You know what I mean? Have like, be able to kind of separate the spaces, still make a big impact, still be a part of like our Sunrise community, but also like, have time for the other aspects of our lives, because that's not sustainable.
Right. This is a wild card question. I'm just going to throw it in there. So there's extremes on both sides of the spectrum of politics. And when it comes to advocacy, even within the climate advocacy movement or social justice, folks that could sometimes be our allies sometimes swing in a direction that can actually harm our movement. And when we're talking about mental health, and we're talking about activism, I feel like the entire political arena is like a pie chart, and everyone has a piece of the pie. Right now, the corporate-backed legislators have the biggest piece because they're reaping the most benefits from the system, as well as the corporations. But activists have a part. And then you have kind of those extremes where there's people who do disruption work, like civil disruption work. Sometimes I feel like they have their place, but sometimes I feel like young people gravitate toward the people that are willing to step up and to come to a meeting or to gravitate towards something. They gravitate towards some of those extremes sometimes because they're really hungry for that instant gratification. They go to a protest, or they go to a sit-in, or they throw spaghetti at a Picasso, or at a, you know what I mean? Or they'll lay down in front of a private jet or something and get arrested. And they gravitate towards that because it's very tangible with direct either likes or clicks or rewards. In some type of fashion. The slow movement building work of having to talk to people where they least expect it, like at a fun event, tabling, going door to door or whatever, that, you don't see that instant change. So it's almost hard to pull people in because they want change now. Mm-hmm. We're in a society where you click a button, you can get something at your door tomorrow. And we're to bring up your point about evolving, I almost feel like there's a large population of us with privilege that are evolving to want that instant gratification now. Mm-hmm. What do you all feel about that space in the climate work? Because sometimes it can get enough clicks and likes to make a legislator want to shift. Mm-hmm. And there's a difference between hanging a banner or, getting in Congress and literally doing a sleep in mm-hmm. where they're going to arrest you to get you out. There's differences between that and then just kind of feeling like they need to go into full on anarchy. How do you guys feel about that part of the movement?
I have realized, even within advocacy groups, specifically that are run through nonprofits too, we have to be very careful and aware of the corruption that might be happening within those nonprofit groups. And unfortunately, we live in a capitalist society.
It's the reality. That's what we live in right now.
And so, what we need to sustain not only ourselves and our movements, it's money. And so I think those instantly gratifying actions are what kind of get the funding. That's what gets the funding and the money from the wealthy people who are aware of what's happening and they're guilty, but they also want to see that their money is going towards something immediately and they don't want to be wasting their money. So rather than kind of committing their donations to kind of long-term movements,
right,
I think it's easier for them to relieve themselves of the guilt through these groups that might be, taking on more disruptive roles. And so, we've seen that, throughout, you were talking about, within our allies, this climate justice is an intersectional problem, it's an intersectional issue. And so, sometimes we see, people fall through the cracks and, needing to get funding. But that's kind of the unfortunate reality that we live in. So I think all we can really do is push with what we're doing. Because we know that we're looking at the long-term vision and not just the short term.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said, Lee. That really resonated to me regarding the instant gratification world. I feel with social media, people get what they want immediately. And I think our current economic system, which is capitalism, it also is very instant gratification where you can get whatever you want whenever you want. With places like Amazon and stuff like that, like I think that can be very damaging, because like the politics is like inherently a slow thing, and I think that doesn't mean that it has to be that slow, but it's going to take like a lot of work, essentially, you know what I mean, to like get change to happen. That doesn't mean that it's going to take forever, but it just means that like it's not going to happen right away, and you got to like, you're going to receive pushback, you're going to receive like you're going to receive trials and tribulations, but you got to like keep chugging, you got to keep overcoming. It's not a race, it's a marathon. That's kind of like how I kind of see like change happens, like kind of with persistence. I think when it comes to like, I think, demonstrations, disruptions, etc., I think that they definitely have they play an important role, you know what I mean, of like putting the spotlight on certain issues and like putting the pressure on the people who need to feel the pressure. I think kind of like anything, like, you can find a balance of that. And I think if you have, as long as you have strategy and if you're intentional with like how you're doing a disruption, I think that it definitely can be very effective. I think that if you aren't thinking long term, then it can kind of become a problem, and maybe it can cause like stuff. It can cause problems that you maybe didn't think that it would cause. So, but I think also something that's very important to me, and I think is important to Sunrise as well, is like, I think that we see like in a lot of spaces, in advocacy spaces, in climate advocacy spaces and others, there's a lot of infighting. And I think that we really want to try to like bridge the gap and like not have as much infighting, because it makes us weaker. So trying to see where we have common ground too, even if we don't agree with people on certain things, like seeing like, okay, where do we really agree on, and let's like focus on that. Obviously like it's situational, so it depends. There's obviously some things that like we cannot be behind if they're like really against something, or really extreme against like a group of people. But I would say like we're trying to like a long-term fight, a sustainable fight, and a fight where we bring people in and we don't count people out.
Yeah. And it's all about the small wins too, being able to have a meeting with someone that we've been really wanting to. That's like a small win. Even, and then like cherishing our friendships and building those friendships. That is in and of itself an invaluable win. And so I think that's how, at least I've been really like sustaining myself with taking on like a long-term vision. Because I think it's human to need to see some kind of result,
Right.
And, for people who are working it's usually like money, but for us, we're students, we're kind of volunteering our time to do this. And so it's definitely, at least for me, the community that's been like the most rewarding.
Right.
And people like you, Lee, who have been constantly encouraging us and giving us like these platforms, and your knowledge, it's the most amazing thing in the world that I don't think most people our generation get the privilege of having. And so having that community is invaluable. Yeah,
it's like the community is kind of the fuel in the tank. Like if you don't have it, like it's going to be hard to get anywhere. Like I can't imagine like if we did like Sunrise and then it's like if we did Sunrise and like we weren't getting any reception at all, like no one was like, if everyone was kind of like putting their back towards us, if no one was really like, oh, that's really awesome. Like I think like inevitably we probably would have been like, wait, like maybe we need to reassess, maybe Sunrise movement isn't it. But I think because we've had a lot of like people like joining in, really interested, we've had a lot of people aren't in Sunrise, like kind of like, supporting us in many different ways. I feel like that like has helped. It's like the longevity too. And I think it's true what Hannah said, like some people don't have that, you know what I mean? Like some people like they might not have like kind of that support system, and it makes it like difficult to make that long-term change.
Yeah, so that's why I call the podcast Cultivating Culture Shifts, because it's slow work that you really need to make your entire lifestyle shift. And when I think about our community, right, I had a new volunteer join one of my campaign calls for another thing I'm working on. And he was like, I just moved here and I don't really know the culture of Orlando, and it's that kind of feeling that I want to harness and curate, because I want people to feel like there's a robust environment here where people are having deep conversations, where people are taking to the streets and building cohorts and networks. And part of that is for the people that are emotionally and mentally prepared to do it, is creating influencers in individuals. I do like personal branding workshops. I try to help people understand the basics of digital organizing, because I hated being on camera. Like, I hated doing stuff like this.
Shy right now.
I hated it. But when I saw how influencers for things like products or, I don't know, trends and dance moves on social media, whatever, when I saw how much of a scale the reach was, I was like, what if I could apply that to the climate crisis work? And said, well, as much as I hate being filmed, I got to figure out a way to get over it and put a camera in my face as much as possible. I still battle with that to this day. It's been 10 years. If you guys were to watch me record myself do a video for like Split Oak Forest or something, you would laugh, because I'd probably do 100 takes. Oh. And I curse so much because I am so frustrated with how it comes out until it's absolutely perfect, right? But with one video, I get so many people to know what's going on, to have the tools and resources that they need to take action. They know where the resources are sourced, and they have our contact information if they have questions. And it's like, as we're evolving as a culture, we have to figure out how to use the tools that I know our legislators, especially the ones that are corrupt, they're not putting cameras close to their face to actually give you information, because at the end of the day, they're hiding their corruption. They're barely going to office.
Mm-hmm. True.
They're hiding. And, it's people gravitate towards authenticity. And right now, kids are like kind of being born with phones. So they're able to kind of distinguish between what's genuine and what's not. That's why the algorithm shows that those videos that are kind of crappy and amateur perform so much better than the really well curated professional videos, because people gravitate towards that genuine reach. So for the Sunrise Movement work that you all are doing, like, you guys are becoming local influencers, and people are going to gravitate towards you because of your heart, because of your face, because you look in your eyes, you can feel that you care, not that you're trying to sell them something. And so that's where I feel the true work of shifting our culture begins, is with creating you all into influencers. So very impressed by that work.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting, I've never thought about it that way. I think so many people use social media as a form of escape from reality. And so, but now with everything happening in Palestine and Israel, I think it's becoming more and more evident for young people who used to use social media as a form of escape, but now seeing all these posts, all these live streams, and all this information being posted all across your stories. Mm-hmm. And it's becoming a reality. And so I think this is definitely the huge critical moment, particular, to kind of create that shift of social media doesn't have to only be for escape, but it can be used for the better good,
right?
And knowledge. And so, yeah, that's such an interesting.
Yeah. I guess our organization is kind of like, just like, it is an organization that's meant to influence people. So I guess we are kind of like influencers, low-key.
Yeah. It's also like, in the morning, some people in the morning, they scroll on their phone, through Instagram. All throughout the day, you kind of just doom scroll.
Yeah.
And so I guess, whenever we post, if someone can see our post on transportation, they'll see that and kind of read through it. And even if it doesn't click with them then, having that kind of be planted into them. And then maybe when the conversation comes back up, they can be reminded of it.
Right.
I think is the most we could hope for.
Yeah.
Right. So talk to me a little bit about your transportation work, like the work that you're prioritizing here in this local chapter.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. So like basically when we first started Sunrise, so we're not even a year old actually. We're like
in May will be about a year.
Yeah, so we're like kind of like 9 months, something like that. So when we first started, it was just like 5 people. With like me, Hannah, Nate, Ari, and Sham. It was the 5 of us. And so we went on calls and we would kind of just like, talk to each other like, okay, what are our concerns about Orlando? Our first big event was a community fest in May, and essentially it was a festival where we kind of like did a launch, I guess, of Sunrise, like the Sunrise Orlando launch. And we basically kind of talked about like, hey, like we are a youth like climate organization, and like here are kind of the issues that we see in Orlando and we want to do something about. And so we talked about a lot of different issues. We talked about kind of like flooding and kind of more like issues with like water, regarding like, whether it be the oceans. But even in Orlando, we have a lot of lakes. We have a lot of like bodies of water that we need to like care of. That was one of the issues we talked about. We talked about so many different things, but I think for all of us, if you're not from Orlando, you've probably heard of it, but in Orlando, we have a very bad problem with transportation. It is so bad. And when we're having these conversations, all these different issues, we definitely cared about them all, but it kind of felt like transportation was like the immediate issue that we're all facing. Like to the viewers, I'm not sure if Orlando is one of the fastest growing regions in the United States. I've lived here my whole life, and seeing how much it's changed has been crazy. And like it's changed in like the best of ways and also the worst of ways. And I think that regarding handling our traffic is one of the ways that Orlando has really failed in, because as we've been getting more people, Orlando has just been giving money to car infrastructure, making more highways, I grew up watching. I think I grew up from like seeing the I-4 like get built, you know what I mean? Like I swear, like me and the I-4 like grew up together. Like it is wild. But yeah, I think we don't have we have the links in the Sunrail, which is like our public transportation system, but they are like way behind of what it could be. And for a lot of us, we experience the same issues. We're in traffic for a long time. Our commute times are awful. Some folks don't even like to drive in the highways because it feels very dangerous, and it also is bad for like it drives up the cost, because owning a car is also not expensive. I think as like young people too, we live in the city without a car, so we kind of experience that, because obviously you can't own a car until you're like 16, 17, 18. So we kind of experience like, okay, we can't get around because we don't have a bus stop near us. We don't have a train station near us. Like we have to depend on the car, whether it be our parents or someone else. Like, and I think that too, like we've really experienced like that pain. So I don't know if like Hannah wants to kind of elaborate more on like us and like our thought process on like transportation and why at Sunrise we were kind of focusing on that.
Yeah, because also Florida has one of the worst fatality rates for pedestrians. Our infrastructure is not built for people.
Right.
So people who want to walk, people who want to bike, they don't even have that option. Mm-hmm. And so really, people that can't afford cars are stuck in their homes. They're stuck, especially like younger children, because it's so dangerous to just walk outside because you might get hit by a car.
Right.
Even when you're, skating, somewhere. We recently had a tabling event, and someone shared with me a story about how they recently, just a month ago, they were just skating on their way to the grocery store and they got hit by a car. And it was a hit and run, and then they just left as if nothing happened. And so really, we could look at it as, okay, the person that was driving the car was at fault, but really it's the people who created this infrastructure in the first place.
Right.
The people who didn't care enough to center people. And so that's the biggest thing, with us and investing in all forms of transportation, breaking a car dependent culture here that we have in Orlando. Because also, no one's going to take transportation or use other modes of transportation if they're just so reliant on their cars.
Mhm.
And also, with walking, these streets that we're building are contributing to the heat, here in Florida. That's what, people complain about, oh, I don't even think I'll be able to walk. It's too hot in Florida. But the heat in the asphalt, it absorbs so much heat that it's about 10 degrees hotter in these like concrete jungles than it would be in forests or like places where there's more greenery. And so I think this is all like a cycle that needs to stop eventually, because what are we gonna do? Build more roads, build more tolls through sacred forests? Like what are like that's and then like Giancarlo was saying, we're growing rapidly, and so we feel that our whole state really, but even locally, needs to prioritize the long-term vision as opposed to a short-term convenience of cars.
Yeah, because I feel like the instant gratification is a problem that a lot of politicians have too. Like they want the instant, like, look, I did this, instead of like thinking long term. I would say, yeah, I think, and transportation like has such a big impact on climate. Like it's actually wild. I think like, obviously like the first thing that comes to mind, I'm sure, is like cars. Like the fumes that they release in the air, like that is like and transportation is the biggest contributor, one of the biggest contributors to climate change, like more than 20% worldwide. And so yeah, the cars releasing like the CO2, but also like, yeah, like Hannah was saying, the infrastructure we make, if there's a place in the city, why not put trees, why not put like green infrastructure, why not have more parks, because this has a cooling effect. And instead we see a lot of places in Orlando where there's not really many trees, and it's just like parking lot. It's just like stroads, like really wide roads. And it's like really hot. It's kind of unbearable to walk there, right? But so it kind of contributes to like continuing the warming. And then also like in Orlando, we have a big sprawl problem. We have a really bad sprawl problem. We've seen from like 2010 to 2020, the places that have grown the most are like the edges of the county. And these are places that like, as I've like when I was younger, it used to be just forest. It used to be just like people used to not really live there. It's just kind of where like from the highway you would just see trees. But now like these have turned into like communities. And I think that it's because of the car dependent infrastructure and the car culture that we keep on building horizontally, and we keep on building out, and we keep on building and building, and it like keeps hurting animal habitat. It keeps hurting like rural lands too, that we need to stop the car dependency, and it's going to help us economically and environmentally, because it is expensive to build these roads too. It is expensive to own a car. It is way cheaper to just be able to go on a train, to go on a bus, to be able to walk to a grocery store right next door, instead of having to drive 30 minutes to the grocery store.
Cul-de-sacs are a curse. I swear. Like I think in the 50s, as like, white flight started to happen in cities, and they started suburbia started to become something that was attainable predominantly for the white middle class. This narrative of like, communities with cul-de-sacs are safer. It's slower and, quite frankly, car dependent solely. It just kind of swept through our country. But there's also the environmental racism aspect of a car dependent community, because a lot of times where the highest density of cars and the least tree coverage happens to be in BIPOC communities that experience like the worst air quality, and therefore some of the most impacted health impacts in those areas. And so, there's a whole other lens that sometimes it's intentional. It's like deliberate environmental racism to cut off communities from, economic corridors of business and put a highway straight through it.
Yeah. I mean, when I would grow up, like seeing them, so like the I-4, so I guess I'll explain it to people who don't know, just in case. So the I-4 kind of goes straight through downtown Orlando, and it goes north to south. And when I was growing up, I would see like basically it used to be a lot of housing there. And as the I-4 kept on expanding its lanes, I would see like basically it would start encroaching in people's houses. And now those communities don't live in it there anymore. And so I kind of like witnessed that. And I would always like think to myself, like, why do those people live there? Like, why would they choose to live there? But the reality is like they were there first and then the highways came later. And the reality was too is that a lot of the communities it was BIPOC communities, the Black and brown people who were the ones who lived there. And I think that the I-4 as well is it literally was built on like adjacent to Division Street, right? And Division Street is kind of where segregation is, a street that like divided Orlando during segregation. So it's kind of like it is so wild, but to Lee's point, definitely intentional. To like kind of like block access and like and kind of like, you know, environmental racism in the sense where it's like it be the Black and brown communities that are like that experience like the bad decisions. They experience the consequences of the bad decisions the hardest and the most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we even see like right off the I-4. I'm not good with roads, but I think right off the I-4, like the Camping World Stadium, and when that was built, like that was placed in a BIPOC community, like that whole space. And then now I went back recently and it's just the land is like getting bigger, like more parking, more spaces for people to tailgate, you know, when they have events at the stadium.
Yeah, it's not being built for the people.
Oh no. And it's purely, you know, like part like for tourism too. You know, you have like the Amway Center right there, and then they're trying to make this space like a hub to make money, and at the consequence of you know, the people who are the most marginalized.
Right.
And, you know, when the Camping World Stadium goes off, you know, you have all the light and the sounds and the light and sound, like the pollution that comes out of that. These communities, these working class communities, they don't have time to complain about it. They have to survive. They are trying to survive in this world that we live in, you know, this capitalist society we live in. And so I think definitely the people in power are using that to their advantage because they know that they don't have the time to organize. They don't have the capacity to do that, which is so unfortunate. And it's disgusting, quite frankly. But I think that's why it's so crucial to have these conversations,
right,
and to be aware of what's happening and then take action from there.
Yeah. Transportation, like such a big impact on our daily lives, on the environment, on housing prices, on so many different issues. So that's kind of like, I guess like the main reasons why we at Sunrise Orlando are focusing a lot on transit issues, making Orlando more walkable and transit oriented, because it is just so unsustainable, like what we're doing now. And I think that if we keep doing, I mean, I think of like, I guess like it's still related, but I think of like, you know, during COVID when like they had the picture of like LA, like how it usually is with like, how it usually is, and then how it was during COVID. And I think LA is kind of like, it kind of is like the epitome of like car culture, I would say, because it was like one of the first cities to like really start building on the car culture. So it was like really interesting to see like how like the sky was clear and all that stuff. And so it's like, imagine if we were to like, we didn't even have to get off cars completely, just get off it like a significant amount and like just start using a bit less. Like it'd probably be a lot more enjoyable to like go outside and do all this stuff. So, but yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting because when you talk about equity, right, it only makes economic sense to start with the most disproportionately affected people, make sure they can get access to livable jobs, because then they can spend more, then they can go and use, you know, I don't know, go to Disney more, go to local businesses more. Like it only makes smart economic sense to build density wise, because you can really have less expenses with maintaining the infrastructure. But there's a difference between like corruption and corporate greed being broadcasted across all industry. There's a very small subsection of developers that control everything. And it's the developers that know how to do sprawl that are kind of winning here, you know, if it would be completely different, and it has been completely different in other parts of the country, where you can diversify the types of developers who have expertise in different types of homes and different types of condos and different types of, plus obviously zoning laws and everything are different state to state. But the developers that run Florida are the ones that know how to squeeze the profit out of every square foot of acreage that they can get based on the kind of copy and paste homes that are model homes that you see, or luxury homes that start at like $600,000 a year. And that's how they know how to report back to their stakeholders. Like, this is the return on the investment for this square footage. And because we don't have that diversity of, different development, we're just seeing that sprawl run rampant. But with the transportation sales tax conversation, that long-term, it's kind of a Ponzi scheme, because the long-term maintenance of the infrastructure for sprawl doesn't pay for itself.
Yeah, literally.
And we're capped at being able to charge the developer increased impact fees, which means the new developers that are coming in and proposing this sprawling development way outside of the urban service area that is like super codependent on car infrastructure, the long-term costs of those roads are going to fall on the existing residents who pay taxes here, which means that the next generation of legislators that come in are going to be desperate to continue more growth to pay for the deficit of infrastructure that they have now. So it never pays itself off. And the first thing that our mayor wants to do is turn around and say, well, let's create a sales tax. And even though we're at a $22 billion deficit, even though it is true and it is needed, there's other tax revenue that's coming in that they're saying, well, let's expand the convention center.
Yeah. It's like, while the tourist development tax, like the tax on like hotels and like Airbnbs and stuff like that in Orlando, they only use it for like, the convention center and like big flashy tourism projects, when like that's money that we could be using for like investing in our people here in Orlando. You know what I mean?
And you check their campaign contributions and it just so happens to be the same names of the same companies and hotels and tourism corridor businesses that are going to reap the most benefit from those decisions, interestingly enough. Not the individuals who haven't had their road paved in the entire lifespan of them living here, or, the ones that have to get to work that take 3 hours on a bus.
Yeah, it's just the money hungry culture. It's like the greed. I feel like it's all over the nation, but it's all over the world as well. And I think in America, we capitalize ourselves off of being, the American dream and the facade that is the American dream. And so I think, kind of getting people to get in line with that, telling people, hey, come here, we will bring you from nothing to everything. And I think that competitiveness, it makes me, to be quite frankly, obviously very angry at these developers, but it also makes me feel bad for them. Like, they really don't have a sense of community, clearly, because they're able to do this, here in Orlando. They've clearly been placed in a position where they feel like they need to survive and compete. And unfortunately, it's at the expense of working class people.
Right.
And so.
Yeah. And it's like you were saying, it's not even like it's economically beneficial to, help the community, to help working class people, to help these communities that they usually like are struggling, who may not have a lot of money. But it just, it seems like there's just like a culture of like, not even like, it just like concentrating money in the hands of a few, you know what I mean? It's not even like like everyone's benefiting from it, but it's just like a few people on the very, very top who are like really reaping the benefits from it. But kind of to Hannah's point, very like shallowly, because they're hurting their own community, you know what I mean?
And it really affects our people too, because I remember when I was working in local government, we had to lower a speed limit from like, I think it was like 45 to 40 miles per hour because there was an accident. There was multiple accidents. And recently a family had died on this very dangerous road. I think we were just proposing to lower the speed limit 5-10 miles per hour maybe. And the comments, people were like ripping us apart because they were like, how dare you make my commute longer?
Oh, that's
and
wild.
It's that brainwash mentality of like, you're mad that you're subjected to the consequences of sprawl, not because we lowered your speed limit. It's because you don't want to sit sit in a car in traffic. That's more time away from your family. That's more time you got to get out of bed and lose sleep, and I have a friend who started Central Floridians for Public Transit. He said it so clearly, it sticks in my head. He said, driving is a job. That's why people get paid to drive items from point A to point B. The fact that you have to get in a car is subjecting you to working for free to get to your actual economic livelihood.
Yeah, because driving is tiring. Like, I feel like if I drive for a long period of time, like you get like kind of like fatigued, you know what I mean? Like there's a cost to driving and like, spending less time with your family. At Sunrise Orlando, so one of the things that we're working on right now to kind of like combat like this car culture and also like these like large developers taking up like all the housing developments, all the developments, and giving us not a fair shake, is we have a campaign to end parking mandates. And so basically we've been seeing a lot of progress on that already. We've been working on it for about like a year now, right? That's kind of been our, like, when we were focusing on transportation, we decided to take on the parking mandates because of the impact that it has and all the societal costs. And so explaining like what parking mandates to the people who might be watching, who might not know, is basically parking mandates is kind of like, it is laws that are in usually local municipalities that tell them like every development must build the X amount of parking spaces. And so what ends up happening is that usually it's kind of like an overestimate, and usually it doesn't account for like the different areas of the different dynamics going on. So it's like kind of like a one size fit all law that applies to like the entire county, the entire city. And so what ends up happening is like it makes it harder to build walkable or transit oriented development because you must always like build this certain amount of parking spaces. Even if you're kind of closer to downtown, you still have to do it. A place that hypothetically should be more walkable and should be building more that way. And so we think by ending this law, the parking mandates, that you will see more walkable and transit-oriented communities around Orlando. Also, it's very expensive actually to build a parking spot. I remember when I first learned this statistic, it was very shocking. It costs $5,000 to build one parking space, like on the floor, like the usual ones that you usually see, and it costs $25,000 to build one spot in a parking garage. And I think usually a parking garage is what apartments build. And so that usually ends up like bringing up the cost for renters by about 17%. And it also brings up the cost for developers too, right? And especially developers who are like smaller developers or developers who build affordable housing. They kind of are unable to do that because of how big the price tag is because of these laws. And so it's important to have not a concentration of power in the few with the developers, but have a lot of different types of developers, like doing a lot of different work. And I think that having that competition, which is hypothetically what Americans like support and should be supporting, right? Having that competition that isn't there instead of a monopoly essentially is going to help a lot more of affordable, help us have affordable housing and help us have dynamic communities that you can choose if you want to drive or take the bus or ride your bike, and that you're not like kind of pitted against other people for a parking space. You're not pitted against other people for in traffic, because a good amount of those people now they're using the bus because now it finally works. Now they have that option.
Yeah, and I mentioned this earlier before, but the reason why we're taking this first step with parking mandates is because we feel like it'll really impact the car dependent culture. That's like the biggest thing that needs to be targeted right now, because no matter how much transportation sales tax, if we find other alternatives to get money into this transportation options, if people feel that it's more convenient for them, like if the rich people, the wealthy people feel like it's more convenient to drive, that stigma against transit is still going to exist in Orlando. And for me, my family were Japanese, and so whenever I'd go to Japan, every single day is always the train station. It is so fast. It is so efficient. I mean, Japan has its like fair share of problems, but in that sector, they've been flourishing because when they were building their infrastructure, it was built for people. And so right now we're kind of taking the stance of we have to try and reverse the actions of the people who built Orlando. And so it's been very difficult, because culture exists because it's culture is culture. It's everywhere. We feel it, we talk about it. And so that shift is like, I think, so important. And it's the most difficult part, but having these like open conversations. And then also for people who have probably always been raised in Florida, they're not aware of how amazing transportation is.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's
real.
amazing. You can get from point A to point B for like, so cheap. But you can also like, for me, I wish, I was able to have like time to like study on the way to school, put on my lashes on the bus. Like that would be so nice. I wouldn't have to be wasting my time in the car and potentially, and because of the infrastructure that we have, it's so dangerous for people walking around. Like we might hit someone, no matter how careful we are. It's just the system that we have in place.
Absolutely.
Dangerous by design.
Yeah. And so, I mean, Florida drivers are also very scary.
They are.
Lots of anger.
Yeah.
Yes,
it's
that's
wild.
something I noticed. I just went to Costa Rica and the roads are so scary there just because like it's so mountainous and people are like walking and riding bikes. So you have to pay attention, which makes it way safer because it's not flat like Florida. But I mean, people were like all over the road. Like you have to be a very active driver. Whereas here, it's just kind of like you're just coasting. And so you don't really pay attention as much because it's just a very flat line.
Yeah.
Which then causes your mind to kind of like lose that you're driving, which is very dangerous. But
for real.
I just think about people don't know what they don't know. They don't know what they've not been exposed to. And so when people get angry, they only know what they've seen. And quite frankly, the tourism industry has a huge hand in all of this. Like Disney does not want people to easily be able to leave the park. They want to design, they have awesome transit options. They want to be able to have tourists easily get to their park, but not easily leave to go elsewhere and explore because that's more money out of their pockets. So they have actively lobbied against infrastructure that we've needed, transit options that we've needed. And it's not until the private Brightline system came in that they still were fighting with Universal to try and make sure that they had a monopoly over, by the way. It wasn't until the private industry came in, but that's not equitable because having a high-speed rail, that's great, but it's great for people that can afford $170 ticket each way.
Yeah.
That's a very limiting number of people.
Yeah, I hope like high-speed rail is incredible. So it's funny because I went to Spain for the first time, very walkable, a lot of very good public transportation. And it was funny because when I was there, I felt kind of like uncomfortable. And I think it's because I was so used to being somewhere very car dependent that it was just kind of like, I was like, wait, I'm not used to this at all. Like I have to take the train and the bus. So when I first went there, it was kind of like, it was like a hit, like kind of like a shock, I guess. But after like I was there for like a while, like I got so used to it and like I fell in love. And so I feel like kind of a lot of people are in that same boat where they need to kind of get through that shock first, and then they're gonna like fall in love. They're gonna be able to bike, and biking is incredible. Biking is so good. They're gonna be able to bike, breathe this fresh air, see their neighbors. Like, they're not going to want to go back once you have a good system. And building like housing, like near transit, and building like transit that's specifically made for people who might not have cars, or maybe not everyone in the building will have cars. I feel like that benefits the transit system so much and starts normalizing everyone using transit. I think I remember there's this quote I saw that was like, a transit system is good when you have both like really rich people and really poor people like using it together. You know what I mean?
Right.
I feel that's like a sign that they say is like a good, that like I saw somewhere that was like, that's a good sign for transit. So hopefully we can get that for like Brightline. Hopefully we can get that for our Link system, our Sunrail system. Because it's super crucial. And the tourist lobby plays they're really big on those conversations. That really shocked me, but I shouldn't have been shocked. Like when Brightline was like still figuring out if they're going to be in Orlando, like there was so many people from like the tourist lobby. They had like advertising. They were like trying to control and like make it go like a certain way. It was wild, but yeah, I guess they're really like calculated about that in there.
Well,
like,
not to mention, I mean, like, it's expensive to own a car.
Yeah.
It is expensive to own a car, but because it's incremental expenses, people don't really think about it. They think like, well, I don't want to have to pay every single time I get on a train or a bus. Well, what are you paying for new tires? What are you paying for oil changes? What are you paying for general maintenance? Like, there's so many things that you just have to pay, especially if your car breaks down, and it impacts all of your livelihood if your car breaks down and you don't have other transportation options. If you live like north of Popka and you work downtown, what do you do?
Yeah, and there's a lot of working class people who like don't own a car already, and they have to kind of like deal with that already. But they have such limited access to jobs too, which is another thing that's like wild, because then it's harder for them to like have that mobility because they're so limited, because they can only get like so far with our limited bus system. That also like limits people as well.
And then of course, to tie it back to the climate crisis, we have to be honest and realistic about the fact that heat stress is becoming a life-threatening and common occurrence. When you start to see places like India that have, record heat of 125, when you start to see places like, or occurrences like the various concerts that happened last year where people literally fainted and died, it is going to become more and more a life-threatening thing to go to work and have to go on a bus that's not reliable, without a bus stop that has adequate shade, and sit in that heat for extended periods of time. We have to talk about adaptation when we talk about a just transition. And that all can be brought up in the conversation of our transportation sales tax and needing to invest adequately in that transition, or else we're leaving people behind. And quite frankly, we're leaving people to die. So didn't mean to end it on that note, but this is part of what you're fighting for.
Yeah.
So
no, it's very, very true. Like not only climate prevention, but also like mitigation is super important, because the effects we're already living it, so we got to like start steering away from that. I guess like we could talk a little bit about like what Sunrise is up to,
right? And how people can get involved.
Yeah. So on this conversation of like transportation and getting Orlando to transition to a walkable city, a transit-oriented city, and a city with options. We're going to be having a rally on Tuesday, April 9th at 8:30. And it's going to be at the Orange County Administration Building. We're going to have a lot of speakers who are in support of getting Orlando away from that car dependency. We're going to be talking about parking mandates and how we got to get rid of them. And I think it's going to be a really good time for a lot of the folks in Orlando who are experiencing the economic, environmental, and effects of living in a car dependent city. We're gonna all come together and go and finally make the change, make the Orlando that we know is possible.
Yeah, and right now, the Orange County is determining their land use regulations, through the Orange Code, and so really, this is going to determine what Orlando is going to be looking like for like the next 26 years. And so, with that in mind, parking mandates is the crucial like step one part. Like we've been saying over and over again, we have to break that car dependency, and so this is what all of our actions are going to be leading to.
Yes. So if y'all don't know Sunrise Movement Orlando, if you don't follow us on Instagram already, we're at Sunrise Orlando FL. Definitely that's the best way to keep up with us. And find out how to get involved. We're I would say we're growing pretty fast. And we need as much help as we can. So if you want to get involved, check us out on Instagram, and give us a DM.
Any closing thoughts to the viewers that are what's the biggest thing you want them to take away from this conversation?
I think the biggest thing is the climate crisis. It can feel like a really big problem that's hard to solve. But if we all come together, and we can break it down piece by piece, get our small wins and eventually get that big win, we can create that better world. So don't underestimate how much power you have, and especially don't underestimate how much power we have together.
Yeah, and you always have a sense of community no matter where you go. You have people like Lee, like Giancarlo, who are so active and wanting to get people involved. And like we've been saying from the beginning, like giving people like a sense of purpose, and so you got this.
You got this.
I don't know if you're feeling this, but I'm feeling like I'm buzzing inside with inspiration. So please subscribe, and thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you all so much.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Good night.